Thank you. This is quite weird for me because I haven't been back in this building since January 2000, and that was the time that I first got hold of Java. I was a C++ developer, absolutely hardcore Microsoft, and I came to a Microsoft conference in this building. And in a bookstall was the book Programming the Java Virtual Machine. And I picked it up and got hooked. So this is why I'm here. So I'm Duncan Pearson, Chief Architect of Anaplan. Anaplan is the leading planning and performance management platform for smart businesses. So what does that mean? So we help businesses to plan their future. And by that, it means providing the mechanisms so that the businesses can understand the consequences of what they intend to do. We've grown very quickly. We started in 2006 when a colleague of mine left the company we were in, set up by himself, spent 2 years in an outhouse behind his garage with a machine programming in Java to get the basic calculation engine together for this, and then joined some colleagues, set up in San Francisco, and over the years have now grown to be, I think, possibly one of the latest tech unicorns from the UK. And the whole of the back end is written in Java, apart from one tiny bit of Node. Okay? So what I'm going to talk about is two things. One is what disruption is and how it affects the different companies and the way they do business and the way they do their planning. And then, towards the end, I'm going to talk about the consequences of that for the design of the Anaplan system and providing something to enable them to cope with this disruption. So, what forms does this disruption take? So, and the obvious one, if you go to Wikipedia and you look for disruption, which obviously I did, you see digital cameras. Yeah, they took over the film business, and Kodak were then faced with the prospect of almost their entire business just disappearing. And then digital cameras got taken over by smartphones. So, I mean, who has recently bought a digital camera? 3, 4, 5. Okay. And GPS, GPS systems, they used to be a really big thing, growing, and now GPS is in your phone. So what's that? So has the GPS market shrunk? Hands up if you think the GPS market has shrunk. Good, because it hasn't. The GPS market, if you are providing the technology for GPS, that is now huge because you're selling to phone manufacturers and you're selling vastly more units than you ever would have done before. So disruption, it kind of might look bad, but on the other hand, if you understand the nature of it and you can realign the way your business is working, it can be good. You can catch a wave and really take advantage. So, but it's not just the technology things. There are changes in the way people do things that are also disruptive. So, who are Google's customers? Quick question. Anyone? Advertisers, right? And who do they provide a service to? Us. So that's a complete mismatch from how things have worked in the past. And it's a different business model. And when you have a different business model, and you want to understand what you're going to do and what the consequences of that are, You need a different system to do it in. So, comparison websites. Who has used a comparison website in the last 6 months? Oh, yes. So the effect of comparison websites on, for instance, personal insurance businesses, it's quite weird, because what you have is that they recognize that introductory deals are important. And so introductory deals are made cheaper and possibly loss-leading, yeah? Because they want customers. And when you're in business, quite often you look on a customer as an asset. And so it's something you're prepared to pay for. And so customer acquisition costs, and you mark it down to that. But as a result, you've got to make up the money somewhere else. So who do you get that money from? Your existing customers? Well, because there's no one else. And so the premiums for staying are actually higher. So what happens is people go back to their comparison websites, and they look for more deals. And so there is even less customer retention, and so there are fewer people to put that cost back on. So that's a really weird market, because the response of the business to the problem is actually exacerbating the problem, changing it. And that's a really weird thing to model. So the other one, environmental change. So does anyone remember 2004? Boxing Day? Yeah, a couple of nods. Tsunami devastated the whole of the seaboard of the Indian Ocean. And the airline industry had, round about the holiday period, yeah, a lot of rework to do in their plans, a lot of disruption. And there's another one as well. I have a vague interest in this. Does anyone recognize this picture? These are two, and they just look like military aircraft, but they are military aircraft at very specific times in April 1986. Is anyone old enough to remember what happened in April 1986? Yeah, the Americans bombed Libya. I was just about to do my finals at the time. So one of my first jobs was at British Airways, and I went to work in the operational research department in beginning of 1987, so about a year later. And do you ever go into an environment and you hear hero stories of mega teams that did amazing stuff on short timescales and whatever? So in British Airways in 1987, the hero team was the team that took their airline information system in the wake of the Libya bombing and completely refactored it so that it would detect the first upturn in transatlantic passenger traffic. And they would have their campaigns ready. There's no point going in too early, but once the upturn happened, British Airways absolutely swamped the advertising market with campaigns and promotions for transatlantic travel, and they increased their market share by, I don't know the exact number, but it was a big margin. And to do that, they had to go into an existing system that was coded to look for certain things, coded to a particular model of how transatlantic travel worked. And they had to change the code. So these were not business people, these were programmers, okay? So you have two things. You have a changing situation, and you have your speed of response. to the change. And if you can respond in sufficient time, then you can catch the wave. You can get that window of opportunity and actually take advantage of or survive the outcome of the change. And it's not just looking at things changing and getting in there before everyone else. It's also something has changed and it might go back to normal again afterwards. Yeah? So there are two sides to this. On the one hand, you have the people who are making the change. I mean, obviously not for natural disasters. I'm not going to talk about the American military either. But you have a bunch of people who are going in and they're reimagining how business works. So Monk Chips mentioned BlaBlaCar yesterday, so we have them as one of our most recent customers. And they are changing the way things work by doing lift share. And that's unusual for commercial. So you have these small businesses, and the characteristics of those businesses are quite different from the large, steady-state businesses, because what they're doing is they're starting off from a tiny amount of market share, they're growing, they're taking on salesmen, they're expanding their market, and all the planning that they do is about curves, growth curves, and the slope of growth curves, and the delay before something happens. So if you take, you're increasing your sales force, yeah? So you have to pay these guys. You train them, you pay them, and they don't actually produce anything for quite a time. But you bearing the cost. And when you get the money, the revenue from them, you're actually getting the revenue from the ones back here. So over here, you've probably got this many people, but you're only getting the revenue from that many. Yeah? So you've got some diverging curves. And they will come together in the end, you hope. And you've got a certain amount of capital, because you've gone out and you've got your Series A funding and your whatever, yeah? Now, if you get it wrong and the delay between taking someone on and getting to the point at which they're actually producing a reasonable amount of revenue, if that delay is longer than you thought it was, those curves, they're not going to meet. You're going to be bust. You're going to run out of funding. And that's a very different situation, and it requires very different kind of modeling from the traditional, I've got 24% market share, I have these customers, I have a distribution, sales, operation planning problem, which is one of the businesses I used to be in, where I did most of my planning back in Roundtrees. Okay? So then you have the people who are disrupted. So these are large organizations who are having their lunch eaten by these guys on the left. Okay? So what do you do in that kind of situation? You have systems that are embedded in your organization that work in a particular way, and all of a sudden, they don't reflect the reality. And you have people in the finance department who can pretty well understand this, but what can they do about it? And they can probably get an Excel spreadsheet and they can do a little model of how it works. But, you know, it doesn't change the way they do their business. What they actually have to have is something that can change the execution of their planning. I believe, hope he's here this morning, we actually have someone from the left in the room. Hands up if you're in data stacks. Stayed in, never mind. And a special prize for anyone who can tell me the way in which two of the established customers on the right have disrupted each other in the last couple of weeks. Absolutely. So Yahoo have been hit by some email security thing, and all of a sudden their valuation has dropped by nearly $1 billion or something. Which, I don't know, do we do M&A for Verizon? We do M&A. We're actually doing mergers and acquisitions for Verizon, so yeah. So in order to respond to this, you need to do two things. One is you need to have a good model of how this works, how the world is now behaving. And two, you actually have to execute. And modeling is one thing. Planning is something a bit more, because planning means not only making a decision about what you're going to do, but communicating it such that the people who actually have to make it happen understand what it is, and then coming back to it and re-examining it, and then moving forward, and then checking to see whether your assumptions about the way the world works are good, and readjusting. And the execution systems involve a lot more people than the modeling. Typically, you have some guy in the finance department sitting down with a spreadsheet, but you've got 2,000 stores. Everyone in the stores is doing planning. And what you have out there at the moment is that the modeling systems, the things people use for modeling, well, pretty much there is only one other than the new wave that we're leading, and that is Excel. And for these reasons, it is personal. It's on your desktop. It does what you want it to do. It's flexible. You can do anything in Excel, pretty much. It's general purpose, yeah? But the execution systems tend to be written by people like us, yeah? So do we have people writing execution systems for large businesses? Oh, no. Oh, well. So they tend to be specialists. They tend to be use case specific. So, for instance, there are airport management systems that people actually spend their entire life writing airport management systems for airports around the world. It's quite specialist, but that's what they do. And they embed the model of how they believe airlines behave and the processes that airline people need to go through to do their planning. They embed those in the code of the system and in the database designs and stuff. So that's not very flexible at all. But on the other hand, they're multi-user systems. And particularly for things like finance, they're secure. And they use a task-focused. So for instance, you can have Excel, and that's great, but if you have someone who's negotiating discounts with corporates, then that person has to have particular bits of information on the screen and has to make decisions in that context in a particular order, and they need to do it in an environment that is focused to that task. But it is how stuff gets done. So that pretty much is where we are with Anaplan, because what Anaplan is designed to do, and I'll come to the design aspect of it in a while. What Anaplan is designed to do is to provide a modeling environment in which it is easier to do the modeling than in Excel. And there are particular reasons why that is the case. And then when you have that, to turn that model into an execution system that is task-focused, multi-user, secure, and that even at that point doesn't need to involve the IT department. And that's a big win for business, finance departments and sales departments and marketing departments and whatever. Because then they don't have to get involved in this, I was going to say waterfall, but no, it's this agile, which means that instead of not getting what you want, you don't know when you're going to get it, yeah? Okay? So we do actually involve IT in an awful lot of stuff, but it tends to be not the first deal that we do with a customer. It tends to be when they realize that this thing that they've got, they can actually use it here and here and here, at which point they begin to see, well, actually, no, there's an organization problem here, and I'd better get some experts in. So what is it that makes a system good for that modeling, but also good to scale out? And one of the key things is that it has to feel like a spreadsheet. So it has to have grids. You have to be able to repivot the grids. When you type stuff in, it has to recalculate. And you have to be able to type formulae in, just wherever you feel like, yeah? Well, I'm against the grid that's showing the data. So I flip, I type the formulary, I go back, and there it is, the response. When you're transferring that into a system, you have to be able to create screens and workflows that are very much focused to the way the users work. And this is where I got a bit funny with the, is it design? The way that has developed over time within Anaplan has actually been very much as a response to initial customer feedback. And in Anaplan, we have these things called dashboards, but they're not dashboards, really. They're just screens with grids and buttons and stuff. But there is a fundamental characteristic of them that is absolutely key to being able to build a system that can navigate a user through a task that doesn't require any programming. Yeah? And that is the concept of a context. So I have a model which is pretty much conceptually like a dimensionally modeled relational warehouse. Yeah? So I've got a bunch of dimensions, I've got some measures, and I'm displaying them on a screen and I'm navigating through. And wherever I am in one grid, that is my location within my data model. And anywhere I go from that screen, I will see UI that is focused around that point. So I can have grids that automatically coordinate. I can put my cursor on a cell in a grid and I can press a button and it will take me to the relevant other dashboard focused on that data. And that's an amazingly powerful tool. The other thing is, your business changes, the model changes. You decide, having implemented this thing in, I don't know, whatever, 3 months, you then use it for a bit, and then you look out, and the world has changed under your feet again. So you need to come back, and you need to change the model. And that change has got to be just as easy as it was to build in the first place. So, for instance, I have a measure, revenue, and it applies to geography, product, and channel. And I decide, actually, no, channels are irrelevant at this point. So you could go in and you can just take channel out, and your model still carries on working. Yeah? So you can restructure. And that means that as people are working on the data, people can actually go in and they can restructure, they can make changes, they can adapt the business model, they can change the formulae, and it just carries on working for everyone else as you're doing it. But the other thing, this is the last one on here that I'm going to talk about, is the scale. So you start off with a spreadsheet and you type stuff in and it recalculates. And then you go and you scale it out, and all of a sudden you've got 1,000 users. And you've got 10 million items in some of your lists. And you've got 10 billion cells in your spreadsheet. And now you press F9. And how long is that going to take you? But for each individual user of the system, it's still just a spreadsheet, and it still has to respond in the same way. So we have to have a very strong focus on calculation speed, on response times, to the extent that we have actually just invested in a new office in London completely focused on improving that aspect. And finally, disruption influence on the company. So we are ourselves a disruptor. We have grown, as I said, over a very short period of time, and because we're bridging that planning execution gap, and we're able to provide the immediacy of response to this disruption, then we are a disruptor ourselves. So part of how we succeed in that disruption, in that hyper-growth, is that we focus on what's essential, and everything that we have done has been done as simply as possible. So I don't know if anyone was in the calculation talk. Actually, no, some of you were, because I saw you there. But it's actually a fairly simple calculation engine, and the concepts behind it are quite easy. It doesn't do anything really complex, but it got out the door. Like I say here, something that works today is better than something that's right tomorrow. Yeah? And the other aspect is that as an organization, we are growing. We had a conference not a conference, we had a kind of corporate get-together in San Francisco, which is where we're based, back in February. And the CEO got up on the stage and he said, right, hands up anyone who wasn't here who was here a year ago. And kind of half of the people, a bit less. And then he went on and back to 6 years ago, and there were 3 people up on stage. Yeah? So that kind of growth has a lot of complexity involved with it. You're growing from 3 people in a room who can talk to each other within a very short period to 4 development offices with development practices, with SOC 2 compliance, with all sorts of things that the guys in the room 6 years ago had no idea even existed. And we have organizational change in the way we manage our growth, our sales teams, our execution teams, the people who actually go out there and they build the software. These teams are growing, and we need to manage that. But at least we have Anaplan. Okay? Thank you very much.